Connect with Elliot in the Morning on Twitter at EITM Online.
Eric, Michael.
Yes. Hello.
There we are. Okay, I was waiting for two hellos. How you guys doing?
Hey, we're doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thank you very much. I enjoyed your book.
Oh, well, great. Thank you. We enjoyed writing it.
The what you call it? The so what it is? 100 of the worst ideas in history. I'm assuming you started when you started out on the process. You had about 10 million of them, and then whittled everything down to 100. But you know, the one thing that I do like is that, I mean, and you probably could have done 100 in any category, but I like that. I like how you guys went in and kind of broke everything out into categories, whether it's politics, pop culture, international relations, finance. I like that you kind of broke everything up like that.
Yeah, it was an interesting challenge because so many of the books that are sort of in our category kind of focus on one thing. They focus on gaps in politics or stupid sayings and things of that nature. But this is the first book that we know of that takes a little bit from politics, popular culture, as you were saying, business, fashion, sports, entertainment, from the recent and distant past, and kind of distills it down to, as Eric calls it, the creme de la creme of really horrible ideas.
And, you know, I'll tell you the other thing that I like is like some things I had never heard of at all. And then there's other things where, like, you may have heard a bit of it, or what you think that you may know, not the whole story, but enough of it. But I like that it's just more than, hey, here was the idea. Like, for example, it's right off the bat, you start with the president that used to go skinny dipping at the down in the Potomac every day.
Oh, yeah, Eric knows that one.
Well, sure. Well, I love the naked president story, and what he would do is this president would go down and skinny dip in the Potomac every day, but that's not really the best part of the story. There was a woman journalist named Anne Royal, and in those days there were few women journalists, and they certainly couldn't get interviews with sitting U.S. presidents, and he wouldn't talk to her. But she found out that he was skinny dipping, went down to the shore of the Potomac, gathered up his clothes, and held them for hostage, and that's how Anne Royal became the first woman journalist to get an interview with a U.S. president. She did it by holding his clothes hostage. But as Paul Harvey would say, here's the rest of the story. Anne Royal promised to keep a secret, and she kept her promise, but as secrets do at the presidential level, especially skinny dipping, these things get out. So he ended up being a one-term president because he lost his credibility. You know, he lost his mojo. As we wrote in the book, his credibility sagged as far as his backside.
Of course. Hey, let me ask you this. But then you also go on, when you're talking about that part, you also go on and talk about Ben Franklin and Teddy Roosevelt also being huge skinny dipping fans. Is that true?
Yeah,
that's absolutely true.
Yeah, our research indicated that both of those notables were very much into skinny dipping, and that's probably not a visual that people eating their breakfast right now or getting ready for lunch really want to have in their minds. But yes, those two famous guys were known for doffing their clothing and hopping into a pool or a lake or a river and just frolicking in the buff.
And then, like I mentioned, one of the one of the ones that everybody knows that Pete Best would have been the drummer of the Beatles, or originally it was playing with them. But then I kind of like if people don't know the whole story or even bits and pieces of the story, the end of that story I didn't know. But like you go ahead and talk about how his not wanting to kind of fit in became one of the, and I think everybody would agree, one of the worst ideas ever in history.
Oh, yeah. Well, Pete Best was a drummer for what was then called the Quarrymen.
Right.
1960 or thereabouts is the year, and, you know, this is the era of sort of doing your own thing, and that hippie kind of zeitgeist comes into vogue, and he's already sort of, as we say, traveling to the beat of his own drummer. And his bandmates wear the leather jackets and the jeans on stage. He wears shirt sleeves and trousers. His bandmates, of course, we know them as Lennon and McCartney and George Harrison, coif their hair in that straight, stringy kind of mop-top style, and he sticks to his naturally curly locks a la James Dean. So he just doesn't ever really get with the program. Now, the other part of it is that allegedly the bandmates were also jealous because he was the really good-looking one. And all of the chicks sort of went to him, even as he zigged and zagged his own way, they kind of followed after him. So they took a vote and said, hey, you know, let's get rid of this guy. He's really not one of us. They changed their name from the Quarrymen to the Beatles. They brought in Ringo Starr, and, you know, pretty much the rest is history. Now, as you were indicating, there is a little bit more to the story.
Right.
Because, you know, he was kind of hurt and bewildered by the firing, and he kind of turned down an offer from the Beatles manager, Brian Epstein, to build his own band, and instead he sits home and sulks, and he's reluctant to sort of venture outside and face the music, as we say, about his dismissal. But he does go on to have some odd jobs. He worked, ironically, in the employment department of the Liverpool government, and he eventually released an album of his own called Best of the Beatles. And of course, everyone at that time thought, hey, this is the first greatest hits compilation of the biggest band in the world, but really, it was simply Pete Best drumming. People were not quite happy about that Best of the Beatles compilation.
Hey, let me ask you guys this, and both their stories are in the book. Bigger idiot, Burt Reynolds for turning down James Bond, or Nick Nolte for turning down Indiana Jones?
Oh, my gosh. Well, you know, we can both have an opinion on that. I think it's probably Burt Reynolds, because the 007 franchise is one that just will never die. He conceivably could have been James Bond for forever. He said, hey, no American could ever play that role. That's a British role. And instead he went on to make a couple of Smokey and the Bandits and a movie called Gator, which I think we can all say don't quite hold a candle to the James Bond franchise. But he could have probably, in one form or another, even as he got older, still be in those movies. And they wanted him, the Broccoli family wanted him very badly. He said no and went on to make just a line of stinking movies.
And by the way, you know the other story that I totally remember when it happened, but I completely forgot about it. And what a massive PR nightmare it was Ted Danson going in blackface to the Friars Club roast for Whoopi.
They're at a Friars Club roast for Whoopi.
Whoops.
You got me on the Star Wars thing there for a minute. And he lays into an N-word-laced monologue stage in the disgraced and discredited, decidedly racist grease paint makeup known as blackface. She even helped him write it. Now, the problem is they misgauged the audience. The audience, even within the Friars Club, which is used to that sort of, pardon the pun, off-color humor,
right?
It's just inundated with hate mail and threats. The head of the Friars Club publicity department apologizes. New York mayor at the time, an African-American man named David Dinkins, and other leaders, condemn Goldberg and condemn Ted Danson for it. She actually defends her man and says that it was a good idea and very funny. But in this torrent of public outcry, his relationship with Whoopi kind of goes down the drain. He had already had a $25 million divorce settlement from his ex-wife, thanks to his affair with Goldberg. And off they went. He actually laid low for a good 3 or 4 years after that and reemerged in a TV show called Becker thereafter.
Right.
Hey, and he actually did okay, but boy, did his public image take a hit during that.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I do feel like he's rebounded from that a decent amount, but at the time, oh my God, I remember that was massive when that happened.
They had no idea, he had no idea what the result would be from that. I think they just totally, a terrible idea because they so misgauged the audience. You have to keep in mind, around that time, we were not far away from the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles. It was the early 90s. The atmosphere, they didn't take the temperature of the room, as they say in comedy, and they paid the price.
Mike, how did you learn so much about the guy who created the intermittent windshield wiper?
You know, that was a movie that Eric and I had seen, and we had read a little bit something about it beforehand. And we were kind of intrigued by the Greg Kinnear movie that got into that. I'll start the story, and maybe Eric can pick it up. But it really goes back to his wedding night, and the inventor of the intermittent windshield wiper was opening a champagne cork, and it hit him in his eye. It left him partially blind in one eye, and it made it difficult for him to drive, particularly when it was raining and the windshield wipers were going. And maybe Eric can pick it up from there.
Well, sure. So he couldn't see very well, and he thought the answer probably is to have a windshield wiper that would stop once in a while and then pick up again. But nobody invented one, as surprising as it is, since all of our cars have them now. And so he got in his garage and started building this thing, made it, offered it to Ford, that stole his idea, and Chrysler stole his idea and took off with it and put it in every car they made from then on. Well, eventually, after losing his health, his family, his wife, he wins a lawsuit, and for $10 million from Ford and $30 million from Chrysler. But by then he's half dead. But now this is standard in all automobiles, and we did the math on this. That if he just got $1 for each one of these,
right,
it'd be worth $500 million.
Jesus.
And that was made into a movie called Flash of Genius.
And his name was Robert Kearns. Robert Kearns was his name. And unfortunately, he decided to become his own lawyer. He was an interesting character. Like many inventors, he had some idiosyncratic behavior and personality traits.
By the way, you do learn that a lot in the book, especially like as you go through the product segment. A lot of these guys who are inventors, geniuses when it comes to coming up with stuff, but absolute morons when it comes to protecting their stuff.
Yeah, they seem to not recognize they're great. We say they're great at coming up with the ideas. They have great creative minds, but often their business acumen is just not there, and they unfortunately become easy prey for people who recognize the business potential of their idea and then offer them a paltry amount of money in exchange for the rights to that idea, and then move it on and take it to the larger market and make millions of dollars off of it.
Hey, will one of you explain to me how in the hell is there still one Sambo's that's still open?
Well, there is. It was an interesting. It was an interesting idea. Sambo's came from the combination of a guy named Sam and a guy named Bo. And they put it together, and they called it Sambo's Restaurant. They started out here in Santa Barbara, and it was basically a coffee shop. It caught on. It gained attention, and it gained popularity. Unfortunately, they really kind of were so tone deaf to the idea that maybe Sambo was not a nice name for African Americans, and they actually doubled down on it. And they painted the insides of their restaurants with the image of what was then called from the children's book of the 1800s, Little Black Sambo. And they had a dark-skinned boy frolicking in the jungle being chased by a tiger. And African Americans just found it to be incredibly demeaning.
Well, how rude of them!
Yeah, I don't know why they would find offense with that, of course, but so that kind of tin ear, kind of tone deafness to the tenor of the time, shall we say, forced them eventually. Now they were around for like 30 years before all of the outcry and all of the public revulsion kind of came back to haunt them. They eventually started closing restaurants right and left. They renamed it to No Place Like Sam's. That didn't help. People still remember that it was Sambo's.
Right.
And now it's down to a single restaurant. By the way, the guy who started it, Sam Battistoni, once owned the New Orleans Jazz.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. You do mention that in the book.
And he was, he's a rich guy and certainly made his money. They eventually got out of the business. His grandson now is running the last Sambo's in Santa Barbara, and from what I heard, I haven't been to it because it's not far from where I live, but I understand they took down all of the pictures and all of the paintings and murals of the black boy running away from a tiger.
Jesus Christ!
Just to sort of quell the outcry just a little bit as people are eating their pancakes.
And then And then before we run out of time, like the sports section is great. I mean, obviously you get the Curse of the Bambino, Disco Demolition Night in Chicago is fantastic. But and whether it's you look at it and you go whether it's somebody like we talked about skipping out on a movie role, or you mentioned Star Wars and how every movie house passed on it. Inventions, WD-40, the guy with the safety pin who loses his ass or doesn't make any money. Actually, does anybody pay worse for being? I hate to call him stupid, but for just there being a stupid mistake than President McKinley.
Oh, President McKinley! My gosh!
What an unbelievable story!
That's if you got a moment, I can get into that.
Yeah, go ahead, real quick.
Yeah, it's 1901. President McKinley is newly elected, and he's very busy. His staff decides that they're going to postpone a meeting that they had set up between McKinley and a guy named Casimir Zegland, who was coming in to fit the president with a new garment that he had come up with. Instead, he goes to Buffalo, New York, to meet people at the Pan American Exposition. At the exposition, unfortunately, McKinley is shot by an angry anarchist, once in the stomach and once in the chest. 8 days later, sadly, he's dead. Thereafter, his scheduling people take a look at the scheduling book, and that meeting with Casimir Zegland that they postponed until after he had gotten back, and he never got back from that meeting in Buffalo, was to fit President McKinley with Zegland's new invention, the bulletproof vest.
Unbelievable.
So putting that off, procrastination, as we say, leads to the assassination of America's 25th president.
That's unreal. Oh, hey, one more question now that I'm looking at my notes. Is it true that they sell $20 million a day worth of Coke?
Yeah, $20 million a day.
Coca-Cola, I guess I should say.
It's the most popular product of any kind ever invented.
Yeah, by John Pemberton, who got pissed off and was just like, F it, you take it. I want nothing to do with it anymore.
Yeah, sold it for $500. Now it does $500 million in like a month. So, yeah.
It's unbelievable. Michael Smith, Eric Kasem, I appreciate the time. 100 of the worst ideas in history. The book's fun. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Wade.
Thanks, Elliot. Great being on the show.
I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Take care.
Bye.
Okay, take care.